Welcome to Talk Cosmos, the show where Sue Rose Minahan and guests unveil astrology's ancient archetypes that continually build the collective experiences in our unconsciousness. Get ready to find your free will from your roots in the stars.
Hello, on this beautiful springtime day. It's June 1st, 2019, and this program repeats now Thursday morning at 6 o'clock, and that happens to be June 6th. And today's subject revolves really about our new moon in Gemini. It's going to be 12 degrees and 34 seconds. And that's June 3rd, this Monday. Essentially, a few thoughts just I'll present about the new moon, because our guest has also focuses on this wonderfully, and it'll be a great conversation, I know. But this particular degree at 12 degrees 34 is just 1 degree away from the Gemini Venus star point. That's a whole nother energy, but it's about Venus. Venus in its 8-year orbit twice goes in a pentagon between 5 points, goes in one direction, that goes retrograde in the other direction. And these points last for 100 years. Gemini is one of them, and at the moment next year it'll be 13 degrees and 35. And Venus will actually be the retrograde, meaning it's going to be, well, the retrograde energy rethinks, refeels, reassesses, reevaluates, whatever that concept, it kind of returns. There will be a certain, the reason I'm bringing it up is it will be a moment that we might reflect back to this time now. So with that said, just know that because when one experiences energy, it's hard to necessarily be too objective, but you might make a few notes of it because it is a powerful time. Every new moon is powerful. And with this particular one, because of some of the aspects, it really relates strongly to our title, which happens to be Mercurial Dreams. You can elaborate beyond that, but part of the process of thinking involves dreams. And what direction are we going and what's our philosophy? And that, in some ways, might be interesting to note next year. Where were we at in some of those conceptual thinkings that we have? Because the dynamics are different. For one, and this is astrology talk, there are nodes, and they're abstract points. There's a south and a north. The south is the entry point that we come to this life with through, in evolutionary astrology, many incarnations. But regardless, you could say that's where our packaging is from. And the north node is what we're integrating, the opposite. Well, and they change every 18 months. There's many cycles in astrology, as astrologers are realizing. But for those that are interested in listening and learning, it's really the study of these cycles and their interlocking double signatures and ways that they speak back and forth. So the point is that right now the north node is in Cancer, and that has a lot of prominence with this new moon in Gemini, because Mars, which is right next to, which is our energy planet, is right next to, well, I don't want to go too much into the chart. We'll go into that. But the fact is, bringing up a little bit about the next chart in a year, which happens to be exact to the day, June 3rd, 2020, when the Venus point, that means that Venus and the Sun are conjunct exactly at that moment. The nodes will have just shifted to be North Node in Gemini. So it'll be more our thinking than our gut, you might say, in some ways, and how our actions and how our perspective is all interrelated. Okay, now that I've thrown out sort of a wide arena, just for you to kind of remember there's tidbits, we'll get down to the now. And with that, I'll introduce our guest, who is Paetra Tauchert. She's been on the show twice before, once for Virgo on September 15th and once for Pisces and that was March 9th of this year. And Paetra is a certified evolutionary astrologer. She writes a blog called Heirloom Magic, and she writes a newsletter that focuses on the new moon and the full moon and gives consultations, and that involves an astrology astro book that she creates. She is an artist. She's a master gardener and teaches those instructions. And most of all, too, Paetra has a musical astrology a radio program, a podcast, and it's called Astroscape. You can find all this out if you go to Talk Cosmos and find bio, and there's Paetra with all this information. It's KOWSFM. So hello, Paetra. This will be fun tonight.
Hi, Sue.
Yeah, we just saw each other at NORWAC. That's Northwest Astrology Conference. It's once a year, every year. It was sold out this year. It was amazing.
I know. The 35th annual was the first one that sold out.
Yeah. So it was so filled with lots of different information, and I've been reading. But I don't know, we could begin from so many points with the new moon, and I know you do a newsletter, so I'm eager to hear your thoughts. I don't know if we should say, first of all, that Mercury, which rules Gemini, it goes around the sun 3 times a year, and it goes retrograde 3 times a year. So it's a significant energy, always Gemini in our chart. And it's our...
Well, it's true. I mean, aside from the luminaries, it's the next planet out in terms of our personal experience, our personal perception and filter of reality of life. It's our conversations, it's our negotiations, it's our transactions. And, it correlates with the 3rd house, which is our neighborhood. It's like the people that we encounter on a daily basis. So Mercury is a very immediate energy. So wherever it is, it's definitely, the moon is the most personal part that's coloring the day. But then what Mercury is doing, any aspects that it's making and the sign that it's in are very, very significant.
Yeah, that reminds me, the area, the house that it's actually located in and the Gemini cusp are factors that people can realize, because that's where this new moon is going to be located, meaning that's going to be aspecting other parts of their own sun, perhaps, or any other planets that are in Gemini, or the mutable signs. And particularly,
right. So if you're looking at your chart, if you know your chart, you can see which house contains 12 or 13 degrees Gemini in it, or if you're using the whole sign house system, just the Gemini house, that's going to tell you where this new moon is birthing in your chart.
Right. Let's see. When it comes to Gemini itself, one of the did you happen to listen to Jason Hawley talk about twins?
Oh, I did. It was such a joy.
Yes, indeed. And that idea that twins look for their other twin. It's like as if the twin is on the horse. They rule horses, not to be too abstract here, but there is some identity with the horses, rather than the opposite Sag, that man is half horse, half man. And so it's looking for that other, what signifies part of them.
Right. The classic twin mythology that you can find through a lot of different mythology is that the twins are separated and then reunited, and also that one of the twins is mortal and one of the twins is immortal, which is speaking of the mortal and divine parts of ourselves.
And they alternate. I think that was another aspect, because, as again in the story, being mortal, Castor, the mortal one, was killed, and the Pollux, the immortal, so grieved to lose his other half that it was decided that they could be united. And it changes differently in different astrologies, because even if you look at the constellation, they're together, but then Castor goes down past the horizon before Pollux. So I think that's where some of the idea that one shares, that they exchange. But it's also said that they both go, they share the immortal, the Hades, the mortal. And then
The time in the underworld.
Yes.
Well, with Gemini, essentially the one divides into the two so that the one can know itself and talk to itself. So it's multiplication through division. And so the one becomes two, and then the two becomes four, and the four becomes eight, and on and on and on and on. And it's really kind of a fractal nature. And the twins concept in general helps us explore, because we all have Gemini in ourselves, so we can abstract this into the Geminis, but everybody has this part of them. And so wherever it is that you have Gemini in your chart, that concept helps you explore all the possible versions of yourself as a way to grok the whole.
It really, let's see, I'm slow here for the words, but what I'm trying to say is that Gemini also labels. And that makes me realize, of course they would. The more things are divided or fragmented, which our world that we live in, this physical world, is fragmented of, every tables to walls to whatever we name. But that would be a great reason, to have that multiplicity, to be able to name it.
Right. Well, when you look at the ignition of the year with Aries, you've got Yang, fire, cardinal fire, and that's the spark, the ignition of the personal experience, getting out of the Pisces like ocean of everything and being like, oh, me, whoa. And then we go to the yin, Taurus, and then we're establishing ourselves. What do we have? What do we use? And then we flip back to the yang again with Gemini. And then it's like, well, what do we think about things? What do we call things? What do we name things? And we know that each sign has a survival strategy. And for Gemini, it is to navigate and orient. So that mercurial, that legendarily mercurial quality that Geminis have is their capacity to land in some place they've never been before and immediately assess the lay of the land. What are the wind currents? What are the weather patterns? What is the language? What is the fashion? As a way to adapt and survive.
It is very true. I have a great deal of Mercury, and it's always illuminating to realize the necessity to realize your terrain, where to know the territory. That's very true, because it gives one that sense of what's possible and how to go forth.
Right. And curiosity really is the driving engine of Gemini. What else and who else is there now? It's the mind and the intellect, and it's the yang side of Mercury, like in the traditional rulerships, which I've been studying lately. Each planet has two signs, two expressions, a yin and a yang version. And so Gemini is the yang side of Mercury, which it's going out and gathering information and disseminating information. It's not retreating in and organizing yet. That's what the Virgo part of Gemini is going to do. Of Mercury is going to do.
It is external. It does form itself to the environment rather than Sag, the opposite, that makes the environment form to them. Yeah, this is a good point. There's always that polarity.
I remember Maurice Fernandez, our teacher's example of Gemini is the Zulu who gets dropped in Times Square and has to adapt. And then Sag is the Zulu who gets dropped in Times Square and expects Times Square to adapt to them.
Yes. Yeah. Vivid. Very vivid. It's so true. So in this particular chart, it's most interesting because the sun, and in the new moon, for those people, it involves the moon and the sun that are conjunct at that exact moment. And it happens to be on the West Coast at 3:02 a.m. this morning.
Right. And it's worth mentioning that a new moon is always sun conjunct moon, and a full moon is always moon opposite sun.
Exact. Very good. So for Seattle, at any rate, it happens to be in the second house, although I don't know what it is in California where you are.
Actually, I think I have this chart with putting the sun on the ascendant, so let me change that really quick.
And for those out there, that's also a very interesting way to look at delineation, to understand.
I was reading a chart with somebody who didn't have a birth time, so it was left over from that. It looks like it's in the third house in California, just in the third house, which is, of course, the mercurial associated Geminian house.
Yeah, and here it would be second, but it would be discussing the form, one way of, because Taurus is that vessel, that spirit into form. It's amazing how every sign, and it's not amazing, because spirit is part of life. And in our world, we don't always consider that. But in astrology, I don't know if it's always considered, but it seems to me it's not always talked about. But in astrology, it is. And like in the first house, as you were bringing up, the fact that spirit is that spark that goes forward, to break away, to separate, to become. And then the second, the spirit becomes part of the vessel, fills the vessel. And here in the third, spirit and form have a dialogue. They alternate. They discuss, and go ahead. So, right.
Well, and we've got sun and moon and Mercury. Mercury's at the latter degrees of Gemini, but still, that's a lot of Gemini with this new moon.
It is. And
I always think about this time of the year as I was just saying this on my radio show, using the metaphor of Aries is the spark where the seed cracks and little leaves emerge first. And then Taurus is where the root extends down and the basal leaf growth establishes itself. And this is all to support the Gemini time, where the aerial parts shoot up and the flowering happens, thus all the pollination, which is a metaphor for Gemini, in its social garnering of names and people and places and information and connections and all that. And we're rising up to that peak of the solstice, and the cardinal signs initiate and the fixed signs hold, and then the mutable signs break down a season. So we have divided into four, we have that cardinal fixed mutable play out 4 different times throughout a year, and at each point they're rising to a solstice or an equinox. So we're building up to the summer solstice right now, and we will reach the pinnacle of the solar year in the north.
Yes, I love the words crack, radical. I love it. Shoots, and it really makes me realize that, okay, if you're in the third, whether it's the house, speaking as an archetype, the Gemini, it really, if you're going to be circulating with identifying, you've got to know what you're identifying. You're identifying all these flowers. It's like you're in some kind of a garden, you might say. Could be a desert one. It could be a alpine one. It could be whatever. But still,
right.
It gives
Gemini is the taxonomy division of botany, the naming.
Yeah. So yes, and I'm noticing too with Mercury at 27, that's exactly opposite the galactic center of 27 Sag, which means Jupiter, which in a sense it is an orb. It is opposite Sag at 20 degrees, meaning our awareness of our belief structures, of visions up and beyond, greater thought, and that's what we're doing, one could say.
Yeah, and we're kind of in the we're in the yin phase of the Jupiter transit because we're at the retrograde stage. So we've been very forwardly expansive with this Jupiter in rulership transit that only happens once every 12 years. And then I think just about a month ago, it began its important and integral retrograde period. And I believe that will be until August. So it is kind of an in-breath right now in terms of that large, expansive polarity point to Gemini. So it's a little quieter, I guess you could say, in some ways. And after it goes direct, then, that arrow will shoot forward and there will be like a huge Jupiterian, Sagittarian theme. But right now it feels like the Gemini polarity point is looming large.
I think for a very important reason. I'm glad you really expand on this idea. And expansion, of course, is an idea of Jupiter. But here is this inversion, because really, as I brought up with next year, this new moon, because one forgets 1 year to the next, it's like, what was happening? But,
totally.
And there's so many changes, significant ones, as we know, the culmination of, which we haven't even brought up, but I will just briefly mention because I'm sure it'll come up again here, of Pluto and, the south node in Capricorn, along with Pluto and Saturn. So, and Sag is going to be joining that after its cycle, because when you said 12 years, it goes 12 years, each year it goes around the zodiac. But Pluto next year, not Pluto, think Sue. Jupiter plays a significant factor next year. I mean, forming a new philosophy. And so this is time to really reassess and be thinking in those, when you say it's retrograde and bringing our attention to that, it's for a couple of months. That's a long time.
Yeah, it is. It is a long time.
Yeah. And, it is right now Neptune. Okay. Well, actually, it's in a T-square. Yep. Because the three of them, and a T-square, folks, is when there's 360 degrees in a circle. Divide it by 4, that's 90 degrees. And there's an orb. Nothing is exact. There's energy. This is all energy, vibrational. And so it affects wider, especially when you talk about certain planets like Jupiter and Neptune that has no boundaries. That's one of his characteristics. And Jupiter that is always expanding, the orb can be bigger. And so right now, Jupiter is more or less opposing this sun and moon in opposition of awareness. And then in the middle, which is tension on both sides, is this collective unconsciousness of Neptune.
Yeah, it feels like it's definitely time to dream. Like you're saying, just that where we'll be. Well, actually, I wanted to ask you a question about what you were saying in the intro. So a year from now, we'll be at the Venus star point, which is inside the Venus retrograde. Is that correct?
It will be, because I noticed that in order to be conjunct, and the sun, of course, as you and I know, but just for the audience sake, never goes retrograde. It's always going forward. But the planets from our point on Earth looking out, which is the point of it, appear to go retrograde, and from that's our experience. And so yes, Venus, and I hadn't checked just when it begins and how, but it is retrograde in order to be conjunct, so it will be retrograde. And I know that with the Venus star point, in 8 years, it repeats each of those signs twice, every 4 years, and in one direction they're all direct, and in the other direction they're all retrograde. So it must be inside that Venus retrograde cycle.
Yeah, I want to say that it's the peak point, although I can't say for sure, but that's what I remembered, that when the sun meets with the planet, that is the peak point of the retrograde.
That could be. Let me look at this, especially if it's in between the nodes. Let me look at the chart for a minute. Here, are we doing a little research? Yeah. Let's see.
Do we have a Mars retrograde next year too? Because sometimes they're in different years, but since we're taking this year off, I think we have both again next year.
Well, I don't see it at that time. It's not noticeable, although it will be 6 degrees from Neptune. It'll be in Pisces, so it's going to be kind of a confusing time.
Now it's going to be quite a year. I'm actually going to look it up and see.
And it is square, and Mars is square the Sun and Venus at that time. That's right. Mars is square. And yeah. But now what were we asking about? We were asking about...
Well, we were looking to see if the Venus star point is the midpoint of the Venus retrograde. And I am confirming that, yes, we have a Mars retrograde next year in Aries.
Oh, so it'll be right after this. We'll experience
like mid-September.
Okay. Well, there's many significant changes, and some of them are how to interpret, So next year, if one has maybe a little journal and takes some notes of where their thoughts were next year with all the different evolutionary changes, one might see where some of the tensions are, that they're really kind of putting into practice some of the theory that they're considering now. That's one way I look at it. But at any rate.
Yeah, agreed. Well, and I think that just the Neptune square right now brings like you were saying, the need to dream in what's next, because, the Goon Squad, that's what I've been referring to, the Saturn Pluto K2, conjunction, it's so intense and it's so heavy. It's like Einstein's theory when you see the image where there's like the bowling ball or something in the middle, where like space-time bends around things.
Oh, yes.
I don't have the words very well, but that's just the sense that I get from this conjunction. And it's just, there's like cue the Darth Vader music when they march down the hall. And so the Neptune piece feels really important because we're dealing with reality with Saturn. So it is what it is, and it's the things that we can't just get around. We have to like negotiate with directly. But at the same time, what beyond that? There's always the subtle energies. And when we have Neptune square Jupiter, like we have the traditional rulers of Pisces, and that is the sign of dreaming. And then if we just look at the isolated Neptune and Pisces square to all the Gemini planets, we know that that is asking for a different type of orientation because the normal one isn't available. So it's asking to bring in the dream time and the fairy realm and the other ways of navigating, that those are as important as any other form of navigation at this point.
And it's very pure. Neptune in its own sign, close to the middle, 18 degrees. Jupiter in its own sign at 20, retrograding, kind of going back to that, in Sag. And then even Mercury, the ruler of the sun and the moon, in its own sign of Gemini. So really, they're talking through their own self to each other, elaborating on all the versatility, the possibilities, the
I know,
potential.
It's amazing, all of these domicile planets. I meant to say Jupiter and Neptune being the traditional and the modern rulers of Pisces.
And then, well, speaking of that, because there is, again, until Uranus was discovered, just for the audience's sake, Saturn was the outer limit of everything, and that's really what it represents is our structure and our reality. So, but it's sextile, meaning it's in that sextile is 60 degrees, and it also is it's been related to Gemini also as a communicator. It's like a network fashion. It's like, okay, let's talk. We can talk. We can work this out a little bit. And so it's sitting right between the two on the square, Neptune and Jupiter. So that's sort of interesting that they're making form.
It is. And especially as Jupiter is moving forward. I mean, right now it's moving backwards, but as it's, moving towards the conjunction with Jupiter and Saturn moving towards their conjunction.
Which will be next Neptune. January.
Right.
Oh, I'm getting the signal. We will. This is with Paetra, Tauchert, Talk Cosmos on 1150 KKNW. You can on Seattle or online app. We'll be right back after a short announcement. While we take a break from this week's edition of Talk Cosmos, let's take a look at this cycle's archetype. We are currently in the period of Gemini. By leaving a cycle based on physical form, integrated through spirit, the energy of Gemini connects spirit with matter, focused on communicating and defining the external. Gemini is a mutable air sign signifying flexibility. Gemini dually focuses upon teaching and learning in order to synthesize the world one lives within.
Hello, this is Marie O'Neill with Padma Life Coaching, and you're listening to Talk Cosmos on Alternative Talk 1150 AM, where we discuss the meaningfulness of our roots in the stars.
Bringing good vibes to the Puget Sound and the world. Alternative Talk 1150.
Hi again, this is Talk Cosmos 1150 KKNW or Talk Cosmos, you can find that. And this is June 1st, being repeated on June 6th. And I'm talking with Paetra Tauchert about our Gemini new moon. And there was one little thought that I was going to mention, that it seems like this on June 3rd, which happens to be, let's see, what time? I had the time. Oh,
The new moon?
Oh,
I
yeah.
have 3:02 a.m.
That's right. But in this, and the energy, it seems to be taking action, wants us to take action with our personal processing of home and our emotional priorities, what with the North Node in Cancer. But that opposes this, as we were just talking about, the Saturn and Pluto in Capricorn with the South Node, about deep structures and our fears and resistance and how we are going to make some of these changes, with working with them more than resisting.
Right. I mean, that's basically what we have to work with, like our voluntary willingness to make some changes in the interest of continuing to foster and nourish life. Because as we know, if there's just growth, that's actually cancer, and that will exterminate life. Just the same that death will, it's just as bad.
Yeah.
So we have to have a balance between the two. And we know that we're born, and we know that we die, and we know that every living thing also goes through that pattern, and that's the design. And so that on a fractal scale is available conceptually across life all the time, an in-breath and out-breath, a heartbeat, has both of those poles. So this heavy South Node grouping is really asking us, what are you willing to get rid of to make space to allow for life to flourish?
And to realize that there will be structures, there will be dynamics that have outlived, I think you've probably said that word, but outlived their need, their service. They're no longer producing a productive life. They need to be let go of. Although I was just reading and reminded that if you have an earth sign, earth sun sign, or maybe a moon sign that's around, 22 degrees, I guess, of the planet. Well, it could even be, yes. We'll stick with the Saturn talk that we're talking about. It could be empowering it. Whereas if it's a cardinal sign, which it is a cardinal sign, that's where, again, it's either cardinal action, it's consolidated, fixed, or else it's mutable, flexible, changing. Then there's tension with those cardinals, like Libra. It happens to be squaring my moon. I was suddenly aware of that.
How's it going?
Well, it kind of helped to realize that,
Mm-hmm.
And
sometimes it sneaks up on you.
Yeah, and also they happen to be located in my fourth house. So I've known it was in my fourth house, and I have given and my moon happens to be with my South Node also. So there's so many dynamics, but I'm realizing that in some ways it's almost like wait and see, because I have been giving a lot of thought about, what is it? Personal psyche and your foundation and your seed. And
what sign is your moon in?
Libra.
Oh, that's interesting, because I know you just broke your arm recently, and that Saturn Capricorn, that's bones, and that square maybe had something to do with the bone break.
So much, I know. And when you really talk about deep things, about when it's your psyche, there's many levels, which I find revealingly I'm grateful for, because after you live enough time, it's like you want to make the most of the time you have. So why let things be obstacles? And revising patterns is really essentially helpful. But with
Spoken like a true mutable.
Yeah, but it is tough sometimes, and I wonder what's really ahead. There's some really strong aspects that are pointed my way. So when you say how is it, I think it's really a matter of learning how I feel, connecting with my story, and being willing to show light. Because if you have Neptune, that's the other part of this. Neptune, like it's in my first house. Sometimes I wonder, do I really see myself? So seeing, some of the shadows of oneself, which is really Plutonian, is a little shocking at first. But then it's like, okay, fine. Now we're going to deal with this. Breathe deep, continue.
Yeah, exactly. Chop wood, carry water.
Yeah, that's it. So again, it is helpful to get some insight. I think astrologers or someone was reading my hand at NORWAC, and that was interesting too. It seemed to verify some points that I knew that at first I resisted. It's amazing how we tend to want to resist information. But
well, even that's kind of a Gemini split. Having somebody read your hand, it's like another facet of yourself. Because, back to the Gemini theme, I've had Geminis prominently in my life forever. My younger sister is a Gemini. My childhood best friend is a Gemini. My first love was a Gemini. My Saturn's in Gemini. And what I've always noticed about them is that they're such sparkling gems, and all of those different facets catch the light in a different way. And, like the shadow version of that, the extreme shadow version would be schizophrenia, but a healthy version really helps us and them to better understand who they are. We all have the angels and the devils inside of ourselves. So there's just a matter of making friends with everything and kind of moving around and being like, who are you? Who are you?
yes. 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 Yes.
Well, and we've got the Mars in Cancer. It's in an applying conjunction to the North Node, and that's imminent. I'm not sure when it gets there. I think maybe it's not until, let's see. No, yeah, it happens pretty quickly actually. It happens right about the full moon, it looks like.
Oh.
So that's when things start to get hot, geopolitically, like Mars on the nodes. It seems like just about always something big shows up with that. And then we're going to be entering eclipse season right about that same time. So this feels a little bit like the calm before the storm, and Gemini isn't very calm.
Well, that's true. It is active because it's mutable and it's trying to figure things out. And that particular full moon, I pulled up that chart because it's always an important factor. And for
right,
other
'cause it's all
people's,
part of,
yeah,
this is the seed, and then that's the culmination.
and the full moon, just for other people's, because there's some non-astrologers, is always in the opposite sign of the sun. So it'll be in Sagittarius, and that happens to be June 17th at 1:31 a.m. Pacific Daylight Time. So, yes. And Mars in Cancer, amazingly, that throws you right back to the moon.
Mm-hmm. It sure does.
And our stories, the moon of our stories. But it's very...
And, what are we defending with that Mars? What stories are we defending?
That's elegant.
Our personal stories are what make us us.
Protecting and defending, yes.
Yeah, without that, we would just be, in a robotic universe. So what is our journey, our story, what inspires us to move? What do we care about? And what do we want to both offensively and defensively protect with this Mars in Cancer, although it's a little more defensive than offensive. Actually, it's a lot more defensive than offensive. Who am I kidding?
Oh, is that because, it is opposite Saturn, so that right there, it's pretty significant. And Cancer, to remind people, is really your own rhythm, your own processing. So in some ways, it's really wanting you to step to your own tune, like beat that drum, dance your two-step or whatever it is, put the music on.
Do it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It is liberating, just that motion. And that's another thing. I think there's a reason to be unsettled. There's a reason to kind of, as we were talking about Trickster last week on Cosmic Collaboration, both the two of us, it's that shifting the vision from what you think you see to not just what you think you see, but what you think you need to see into some other reality that is better for us in the long run.
Right, again, the visioning.
Yes, back to Neptune. Neptune is going to be with us for another 7 years. It's really like the backdrop, it seems, beyond everything. I think it might be the last planet to be really changing into a, that's in its sign now that takes the longest to wait to go to the next sign.
Well, we finally passed the halfway point. It's going to retrograde and go back to, I think, 15, but the fact that we've made it to 18, that's we're pretty far.
Well, it's been squaring my sun, so I know, and it will go back. Yeah.
Mhm.
And it dissolves. It's quite significant.
We also have, helping out the Goon Squad, helping relieve some of the tension of the Goon Squad. We've got the Venus and Taurus in a pretty tight trine to Pluto and to Saturn in the South Node. And that's helpful just in terms of remember the self-care. Remember that no matter what goes on in a day, you can still take a bath and pick a bouquet of flowers and eat some fruit and be kind to yourself as a way of being kind to everybody, because self-care does radiate outwards in our lives. And Venus and Taurus is always reminding us to be in our senses, to be in our body, to invite spirit in through the pleasures of what it means to be in a body and have five senses.
Now, that's in the new moon that you're looking at. Of course, it's
That's
also...
in the new moon. Yeah. It's probably in Gemini by the time we get to the full moon.
It is. It is. In fact, it's almost right exactly where it's at 10 degrees, and this is 12 degrees. So it's 2 degrees. So in some ways, what you're saying is what we are thinking and dreaming, our mercurial refashioning of our dreams and our visions and our possibilities. At that time, we'll put heart. Heart will return to that spot, maybe. At 10 degrees, it's sort of like a little signature reminder.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
See.
It seems, I'm just, let's see, looking, okay, there's the full moon and the new moon, because they're about every 2 weeks. But this seed, it's a seed time. I guess that's one idea that seems so general that we didn't really maybe pause on it much. But it
I mean, it's exactly what it looks like if you're learning about following the moon. It's the new, the dark moon is the dark moon. We don't see it, and that's the dream time. And then the new moon spark is that tiny sliver, that tiny crescent, and that's the inception of the visible light, is the inception of the new cycle. And whatever it is that we focus on and call in with the new moon, then it's going to continue to grow as that moon grows. I mean, it's an immediately visual reference. We can look up and be like, how's it going? Like, oh, look, now it's a Cheshire cat smile. Oh, now it's an orange slice. And reaching all the way to the fullness. And that is where everything is, so full, so full, so full. And then the cup spills, and then we slowly lose the light and can do it again and again for a really long time.
But wait, this is a subject I was almost thinking of for next archetype, which will be Cancer. But
right.
Because the nodes are in, but the fact is the new moon is relevant. The North Node being in Cancer means that the moon all year is really significant. It doesn't change until 29 degrees Gemini, until just about when the Venus star point happens next year. Anyway, that'll be 29 degrees Gemini will be the North Node. So that means all these, like you're bringing up the point that, the phases of the moon, really significant for us for the whole, for another 12 months. They're going to alter, they're going to make different adjustments all through our chart. In some ways, it's not really mercurial, it's cardinal, because the moon is, well, no, it would be all kinds of things, wouldn't it? Because the moon changes a new sign every 2.5 days.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing for, again, we're jumping to your next month, but the Cancers are, they're different people every 2.5 days. There's somebody that has a Cancer ascendant. It's every it changes often.
Right. But I'm thinking it will for all of us starting even this month. It's relevant because the North Node is in Cancer, and the moon rules Cancer. So from that standpoint, it's still very significant. So when you were talking about this, for people to recognize like the new moon and the full moon, just this every 2-week pattern with the moon, as you were saying, going through the crescents and the quarter moon and the different phases, is relevant to how we might process how we're integrating the direction, our self our tempo, our personal tempo. It'll keep changing because of this North Node in Cancer.
Right. It puts a natural emphasis on the feminine, on women, but men cycle too. So it's just that concept of cycling and going from empty to full to empty to full to empty to full.
Oh, I love this. Yes, I like all people, and that's a good analogy, empty to full. Yeah, and back to Saturn, with this dreaming factor that we brought in because of the energies of Neptune and Jupiter, Saturn sitting right between, it might be mitigating, but also perhaps in one sense it's getting both Neptune and Jupiter on either side are able to work with the fears that maybe are associated with Saturn, come to think, and try to expose those and reformat them.
Yeah, it does feel a little bit like they're flanking in a helpful therapeutic way.
Oh.
Like, the bonification that the proximity of Jupiter brings to planets, and I don't know, I guess the transpersonal dispersion of perspective that Neptune brings.
It's so wide. And remembering too about music. Now you do a music show. It's a wonderful show, folks. I mean, it's every 2 weeks. I think on the even Tuesdays at 10 o'clock. Is that it?
The second and the fourth Mondays of each month.
Okay. So it'll be like for Gemini, it'll be about Gemini musicians. But the idea of, hey, we have Neptune right now. Put on the music. Let it kind of jiggle our brains and our feet. It shifts the dynamics.
It does. Well, music's kind of like the sense of smell, where it seems like it bypasses the normal processing and it takes us to somewhere else.
Yes, it does. Even the music itself, the words too. There's so often I love a song and I know the music, and then I'll find out the words kind of mean what I thought the song meant. But I wasn't really listening to the words.
Yeah, you can grok it just from the feeling of the song often.
Yeah. And it's so necessary. Again and again, they speak of music as that language that is our innate poetry of our soul, or something like that.
Thank goodness for music.
Yeah. I mean, some people learn language through song. I think I learned French a little bit through a French song I had to learn once. I could.
Well, and just thinking of the oral traditions that predate writing,
boy.
How like spoken word and song helped to keep the memories of the different peoples.
When one thinks about it, it is just incredible, because it wasn't until 5,500 years ago. It seems like a long while, but Sumerians, 3,500 BC, that any kind of documentation happened that went in, finally evolved into writing. But then the printing press wasn't until when? I think the 1600s, 1500s?
I was going to say the 1500s. I'm not sure that's just...
No, I think you're right. That seems better, which is akin to our internet. And so being able to share and write, but yes, oral language, telling stories and the memories and the...
1440.
That's even earlier, 15th century.
Right. It would be interesting to look at the charts of the printing press and the internet, when whatever those nodes, whatever chart you can cast for those, and just look at anything that would correlate, just because they are such significant points in terms of human communication, the human management of media and information.
Yeah. Nodes would be important because the outer planets weren't discovered at that point, not until 1700s, although they're there in the background, always.
Well, yeah.
But,
I mean, I've been really taking the deep dive into traditional astrology after studying modern astrology for a long time. And just the fact that the zodiac was developed based on the 7 visible planets is very profound. Even if you work with modern rulers, it's really worth taking some time and checking out what's referred to as the Thema Mundi, the chart of the world, the birth of the world, and just seeing how elegant that system is, and then knowing that that's where we are coming from. It's like everything's going to continue to evolve, of course, but there's a very beautiful system that isn't really lacking anything. It's just we've diversified it more when we brought in the outer planets, whether you use them as rulers or you use them kind of akin to fixed stars because they don't move very fast. However it is, there's lots of astrologies, but I've just been very taken with that traditional rulership thema mundi lately.
Well, good timing too, particularly with all this emphasis on Capricorn. It is a tradition. It is the history. It is our, along with that axis of Cancer, ancestry, structure. And so once you have to know it in order to break it almost. It's like, I think Picasso was a great artist, but he knew anatomy, and then he could shift
Well, it's true. I mean, and I was going to use Picasso as an example too, because we know him for his, Cubist phase, etc. But I have seen exquisite classical works, paintings by Picasso that they're flawless in the traditional classical style. And then from that base, he went on to do his other things. And, even if he didn't have that base, his modern work would still be amazing. But knowing that he had the capacity to refine that craft to such a level and then create his own thing is, it's very profound.
He was prolific. Prolific, amazingly. Really yes. Was. Yeah. There was a great exhibit here in Seattle with Picasso. It was
neat.
Exciting. No, so knowing traditions, knowing it's an important time to do that dream. What you're saying is like, okay, because at one time Pisces was ruled by Jupiter, for tradition. I say one time because ultimately I'm a modern astrologer, but still, and amazingly it's square itself, then you might say, with Jupiter. And of course squares are that tension that we're talking about of finding a dynamic resolution. So, and then Saturn, ruled Aquarius, but Aquarius doesn't seem to be so. I was looking it up. Okay, so in other words, it would have been February 3rd, 1468. Was that? Oh, that was the man. That's when he was born. Oh, that's
the printing press.
Yeah, and it doesn't say exactly. No, maybe it is. Yeah, February 3rd. Well, 1468. I'm going to look that up right now and find out what it is. We have a couple of seconds here. Maybe I can do it quick. I'll just do X.
Were you looking up? Did you look up Gutenberg? Is that what February?
Yeah. Did I say what date did I give you?
Actually, I think that maybe was his death date, February 3rd, 1468.
Oh, drats.
They don't have his birth date, just that he was born in the 1400s.
Oh.
Or maybe he was born in 1400 and he lived to be 68.
Okay. Well, it's got to be when the first book happened. They have to have Gutenberg.
The Gutenberg Bible.
Bible. Okay. Bible printed. When? Oh, 1454 or 55. Okay. Well, let's say it was. We're going to run out of time pretty quick here, but let's see.
That could be food for future thought.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, okay. Well, I will say real quickly, next week we're having Wendy Wyrot, and we're going to be talking about twin mythologies. And Wendy is an astrologer here, traditional shamanic spiritual archetypal astrologer from the local area in Redmond, I believe, Bellevue. And so that'll be involving many twin mythologies. And you are listening to Talk Cosmos. This is June 1st, repeating on the 8th, in case you're listening then, with Paetra Tauchert from Sebastopol, California. And check her out on the web, on my bio here. And you can find out how to reach her for any consultations and all of that. So there's something you want to say while I look this date up. Go ahead.
Oh, let's see. Well, just looking over my notes, some more thoughts about Gemini is that, it's a mutable air. And so we know that the mutability means that it changes things. And the way that Gemini changes things is by thinking about them. And that, much like the wind, a Gemini is constantly changing direction and changing temperatures as a way of adapting and learning about life.
So this is important. In other words, if one is flexible right now and their dreams and their visions are shifting that core conditioning that they're having, opening up new belief structures, that's part of the process. That's very important.
It is, and one of the ways really to work with astrology is that we know that each sign is a reaction to the sign before it, and that it's important that we fully inhabit and embody each of the archetypes as we pass through them as a way of really living our lives to the fullest in a certain sense. And the new moon is really the fullest expression of a sign, because when we get to the full moon, the new moon is the fullest expression. The full moon has the opposite sign as the full moon, so we're dealing with the dyad then.
Ooh.
But the conjunction is the double.
Yeah, well, talking about that, it was in air. The nodes were in Libra, Aries, and the moon, for whatever I did, was conjunct the sun. Okay, at that
Well,
time.
that sounds like a new moon. Thanks, Sue. This has been really great.
Oh, thank you, Paetra. All right, till again. And thanks, everybody, for coming and listening.
Thank you for listening to Talk Cosmos, the show where Sue Rose Minahan and guests unveil astrology's ancient archetypes that continually build the collective experiences in our unconsciousness. Be sure to tune in next Saturday at 6 p.m. to continue finding your roots in the stars.